You've all seen the show, you've seen the memes, and you've seen the over-the-top viral shorts poking fun at how serious the bear is. And if you work in a restaurant, you've probably gone to work calling every chef in the building Jeff for at least 1 week. But do you know the backstory about how we got such an over-the-top dramatic comedy? Today, let's get up to par on The Bear. The show dropped on June 23rd, 2022 on FX on Hulu and became a massive hit out of nowhere. Let's take a moment to go over the cast so that way we have an idea who everyone is and what their parts are. Of course, we have Jeremy Allen White as Carmen or Carmy. He takes over the restaurant because his brother Michael committed suicide, and we're going to touch more on that later. We've got Ebon Moss-Baccarat as Richie. Now, he is the best friend to Michael, and he's got this relationship with Carmen as well, where they're always calling each other cousin, even though they're not actually related. I guess that's how people in Chicago do like a bro thing like you might do somewhere else. Those are the two main antagonists of the show, constantly pushing at each other. We've got A.O. Idrebri as Sydney. She gets hired in as a sous chef. Then we've got two supporting family members. We've got Abby Elliott as Natalie, Sugar, and she is Carmy's sister. And we've got Oliver Platt as Uncle Jimmy. And surprise, surprise, he's not their real uncle, just their father's best friend. There's three important cooks at the restaurant we should know. We've got Liz Colin Zayas as Tina, Edwin Lee as Ibrahim, and Lee Boy as Marcus. The first season received so many awards, it's just easier to list them all. Yes, excuse me, chef, but will that be on the exam? That's all insanely impressive. But what got us here? The show's creator, Christopher Storer, was on fire before The Bear. He worked with Bo Burnham on What? And Make Happy, and Burnham's debut film, 8th Grade. Plus, he teamed up with Hassan Minhaj for Homecoming King, which won a Peabody. That's some pretty wild stuff. And let's speak of Peabody Award winners here. Check out my last episode of Up to Par, where we took a brief look at one of the best authors and speakers of all things culinary, Anthony Bourdain. Alright, now let's get to the meat and potatoes, no pun intended on The Bear. What is this show really about? Well, we have Carmy, who inherits his brother's restaurant, the Original Beef, after his brother Michael commits suicide. Carmy's background, fine dining, Michelin stars, the whole white tablecloth thing. So coming into this chaotic, barely functioning sandwich shop, yeah, that's a lot for him. Add to the fact that you have Richie, who acts as a co-manager, and he's very reluctant to any change that Carmy wants to establish, because he feels like it's a betrayal to Michael's memory. And before we get too far, let's talk about Michael. He's the 600-pound elephant in the room most of the show. His name gets tiptoed around. They have a hard time bringing themselves to talk about him. Sometimes it just comes out easy for them. He committed suicide. His character had a problem with alcohol and drugs. And Christopher Storer borrowed from his real life. He had a friend who also committed suicide just before he started working on the beginning of The Bear. And according to an interview he did with Esquire magazine, he said him and his friends would establish a text message chain where they would be talking to each other about what happened, and none of them realized the deep battles, demons, and troubles that their friend had. So he wrote that into the script. We know that Michael has problems. We don't know to the extent that he has problems. Everyone loves him too much to trash his memory and say, you know what, he did this to himself kind of thing. One of the ways that they help deal with it is Sugar makes Carmy go to Al-Anon meetings. Every once in a while he'll have a horrible nightmare, either caused by the stress of the restaurant or something to do with his brother triggers these nightmares, and he finds resolution through going to Al-Anon meetings. So one more thing I want to mention about Christopher Storer and his Esquire interview was he said he watched a lot of Das Boot and Crimson Tide while working on the show, and that pushed him to think of the kitchen like a submarine. You have tight quarters, high pressure, and you may not like anybody you're in the room with. but you're there and you're stuck. All right, now that we have all the backstory out of the way, where do we come in? Well, we come into the restaurant, the Original Beef, in Chicago. And this place is a time capsule. Again, in his Esquire interview, the restaurant that they used as a model had a big sign inside that said, "It may be 2022 out there, but it's 1988 in here." And that's exactly what the place is like. Everybody is set in their ways, the ways that Michael established. So Carmen, being a Michelin-starred chef, trying to elevate it, is hit hard with resistance. And because he's trying to do things, they're running out of money. The restaurant is borderline broke at this point when we start. He's having to pay vendors when they drop food off, like in cash as they go, which is not really common unless you're writing bad checks. At our restaurant, the food gets dropped off, the bill gets paid, it's got a net 30 on it. We don't have to pay it for like a month. When you start writing bad checks to your vendors, they want money as they deliver. What does he do? Well, he hires a sous chef who shows up because she tracked him down. She wants to work with him because of his reputation. And that happens. There are chefs in the real world who want to train and work with other chefs, so they stalk them almost. They find out where they are, they find out when they'll be there, and they get themselves in. That's exactly what Sydney did. She offered to stage, which is when you work for free to gain some experience or like a working interview. With her help, he's able to start turning the restaurant around. They start making improvements. Other staff like Tina starts to slowly get on board. But it all comes to this big crash. A few episodes in, near the end of the first season, they try going on a skip the dishes style app where they can do takeout orders. But Sydney doesn't have the pre-order turned off. And what happens? As soon as 5 o'clock hits and they open up, they get slammed with 200 orders. Now that's pretty unrealistic. From my own experience with those apps, as soon as a pre-order comes in, the machine dings. So you know as they're coming in, before they come in, and you get the choice to accept or decline the time that the customer wants. So I find that to be movie hogwash. The real part about that does set in is how hectic it can be when you fall behind. I'm going to tell you a little story about myself. It was 2021. It was Mother's Day. And if you don't remember 2021, lots of the world were under government lockdowns from COVID-19. Where I live, Ontario, Canada, was no exception. We were only allowed to do takeout orders. So we had about 25 orders being picked up between 5 and 6:30. Those 25 orders had 4 or 5 meals each, so, like 150 orders. We also had a separate, in addition to our menu, we had a separate feature. It was a 4-piece family-style chicken parmesan dinner. It was a big takeout container with penne pasta and 4 chicken parms that we were selling for $50. Off to the side, we had a few orders of that, I think maybe 10. So the phone kept ringing all day long, and we kept taking orders. And by time 5:30 rolled around, we were so far behind on cooking food that we weren't even firing it till people walked in. It was one of the hardest experiences in my life. We ended up doing 200 meals, plus another 100 meals through the chicken parm deal. It was brutal. I completely understand the stress that these characters were feeling. However, there was some pretty unrealistic aspects to it that are jazzed up for TV, such as Marcus, their pastry chef, who had been working on a side project where he's been trying to make the perfect donut so they could do a dessert special. And in the middle of this chaos of a printer shooting out 200 takeout orders all due in 15 minutes, he has the lack of common sense to walk up to Carmen and say, "Hey, I figured out the donut. You gotta use yeast and baking soda." Carmen takes the donut, and in true proper chef manner, this part is not exaggerated, Carmen's reaction, throws the donut on the floor and asks if he's fucking serious. Because at that point, Marcus should have seen, oh, this ship's sinking, what can I do to help? Now the fallout from that, not quite, he quits, gets fired kind of situation. Sous chef Sydney, who Carmen blames for this, he yells at her really, really hard. She starts having almost like a hysterical breakdown. And he's like, "Are you okay, chef? Like, I need your help." And she goes, "No, I'm not okay, I quit." And she walks out in the middle of it. Now, I did skip from the beginning to the second last episode because there's a lot of filler in the middle with some character development that you're gonna love. But I don't want to spoil the entire show for you if you haven't seen it yet. When you get to the final episode of the season, Carmen is having some daydreams. He's not quite sure what's going on. Now, when we get to the finale, Richie hands Carmen the suicide note from Michael that he finds. He found it an episode or two earlier, kind of put it in his pocket. Explains to Carmen that, if I gave it to you earlier, it's like admitting he was truly lost. So Carmen, accepts the apology, takes the letter, reads it, and it's a recipe. Michael's telling Carmen, cook this dinner for family meal, which is a family meal for restaurants that do it. It's a dinner for the staff before they open, where everybody can taste the specials of the day. But he says, make this for family meal and use the small cans of tomato. They taste better. When Carmen reads that, puts a smile on his face, and he sends Sydney a text message saying, your dish was good. It just needed some acid because they had previously had a little fight over one of her specials. He goes inside and he starts making the spaghetti dish. And when he's opening up these little cans of tomatoes, he finds money. He finds $300,000 in it across all these cans. Everybody's excited. They're all opening these cans because there's like 10 grand in each can. Sydney walks in the middle and the two of them lock eyes. And they start talking about a fine dining restaurant, what they could do differently. So the show exits out to everybody, all the cast eating family dinner of the spaghetti, and Carmen puts a butcher paper sign up on the door that says, "The original beef is closed, the bear is coming." That's how the season ends. That'll get you up to par on the first season of The Bear, so you can go into it knowing exactly why everybody loves it. If you're on the fence, maybe you watched the first episode and didn't really dig it, now you'll know why everybody was so all over it.